was born. She was born there in Canesville, near where the saints were grouped there, near winter quarters. So that's where she came. And anyway, then when James Connell met Sarah Pendleton, they were married, and that's where our mother, that's the mother's line there. Now then, from that line, all of you descendants, go back through that line, through the Pendleton line, which goes back into the New England history, to a couple of individuals who you may have heard about by the name of John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. Okay? You remember the story about that? Okay. Now, Priscilla Mullins traces her genealogy back to France, to the Molyneux. That's where the Mullins come from, is Molyneux. And you go back several generations to the Molyneux line through there, and you come to a couple whom you will find listed in your encyclopedia as Peter Abelard and Eloise. Okay? Eloise. So look them up in the encyclopedia, and you'll know a little bit more about some of your ancestors. I think I've taken more time than I should, but if any of you are interested in looking at any of this stuff that I have here, that I've gathered, feel free to do so, and I'd be glad to do it. But folks, be proud of your heritage. You've got some. Philip, you have a question or comment?
Well, I was wondering, since this last month's Insight had an article about crossing old ships, if you knew any more about what ships were crossed on?
Yes, there's the John Boyd. It's in your red. It's in your red book. Yes, Audrey.
I don't remember who told me, but I think it's somebody in the Pendleton line that had something to do with making or designing the paper on which our money is printed.
It took very well with them.
France.
That's Crane.
France.
Yeah.
And so that's somebody in our line.
The Crane family?
Crane family.
Yes. Yes. Go ahead. I'm through.
Okay. To mention one other thing, we like to brag about our ancestors. Louis Chevrolet worked for two Matheson brothers in Ohio, Indiana, Ohio area, when they had an automotive manufacturing shop. And when you go to the museum there in Detroit, where they have all this old automotive equipment just out of Detroit, you'll find a Matheson car. These men were descendants of the Alexander Matheson that Mac said went to Canada, our great-great-grandfather. From that family, there are some members of the church, incidentally. We have one in Springville who is a descendant, a member of the church. He's filled a mission. But Louis Chevrolet worked for two Mathesons. They patented the first overhead valves, I believe, the automotive motor with an overhead valve, and they had a Matheson car. And you'll find a Matheson car, as well as an engine and the overhead valves, in this museum there just out of Detroit. So they were invented. I believe the bed that Mike referred to was the fold-out apartment bed that opens out with the door of the closet and then folds down. But nevertheless, it was an invention that came from them.
But see, Chevrolet learned how to do it from a Matheson.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. Mathesons are very clever, are they not? Would it be fun to drive a Matheson car instead of a Chevrolet? Or a Honda? Yeah, in the service.
Yes, I was in the west of Scotland in a little town called Dunoon, and about 35 miles from Glasgow.
Interesting. Yeah.
I was just wondering if there's anyone in this room whose roots aren't in that British Isles area. As near as I can tell, every family represented here had roots there, with maybe some rare.
Could be. Some of my roots come from Indians in Oklahoma.
I was just thinking, Lloyd's people came from there, my people came from there.
Sweden. We've got Sweden and Danish over here.
Della comes from there.
We were quite surprised to learn that our family, the Gooch family, came from England, came into Virginia that way. And Williamsburg, Virginia, was named after a guy by the name of William Gooch. Williamsburg.
When Mac was describing Daniel and Catherine, I remembered something that Uncle Owen had told me one time when I was visiting Maryland, that they had daughters, but they did not live.
Oh,
And
that's
they
it.
had named these daughters Catherine, and I guess they had named each one of them Catherine, and they had all died.
I see. So they wound
And
up
she
having all
told
boys.
her descendants not to name any of them Catherine. And so when we had our daughter, and we decided to name her Catherine, we have always claimed that she was named after her grandmother, Catherine Boyer. But her name is spelled like Catherine Credit.
Well, it was always amusing to us to know that there were so many boys in that family and no girls. When we started out, well, we filled up the backyard with girls to make up for it, I guess. Alice?
This family that you're talking about was his grandfather.
Oh, grandfather.
Yes. Oh, grandpa and grandma, Alexander and Lydia, had 9 boys. Alexander's father and his wife had a family of girls, and they had 3 daughters that died, and they named all 3 of them as they died, and the next one that came along, they named her Catherine.
Yes.
This was the grandmother.
Ellen McKell was the only daughter that lived in that family.
The only living daughter of that.
Interesting. Well, I purposely asked to take a few moments of your time to talk about these 2 people you see here, William John and Margaret Mamie, and for a couple of reasons. One is that I hope that in sessions such as this and in any future Matheson reunions that we might have, that we always return to this same origin, and that we never forget that this is where we all came from. And Mac has done a remarkable job in doing that same thing in his Matheson Times. He's continually talking about these 2 people here. Well, of course, there's a second generation after that that we're emphasizing here today, but we do want to remember William John and Margaret Mamie. I suspect that most of the people in this room never even saw either one of them. Am I quite right? For those of you who may have seen Mamie, it may have been during her twilight years when her mind was clouded, her eyes were tired, and she was longing for some kind of release. So if that be the case, then what kind of a memory is it for you? Not much, is it? The only thing I can suggest for you about Margaret Mamie is to try to remember her as someone like yourself. She lived at your age at one time. She was a young girl. She went to school at Parowan. She was your age, Caitlin. She liked school. I remember one time she told me personally that she enjoyed her English grammar classes more than anything else. And she liked to parse her sentences. Parse her sentences. Do you parse sentences now? I had to look it up. It means, we call it diagram. Does anybody parse their sentences today? You parse your sentences. I learned that from Grandma Matheson. You might try remembering her as a young teenager, growing up in Parowan, putting on a nice dress, going to a dance. Dancing was a very accepted social arrangement in Parowan. Rather like you, Gina, she liked to wink at the boys and give them a little thrill once in a while. She wasn't quite as pretty as you, but on the other hand, there's not many people who are as pretty as you. And you might remember her also as a young bride and a young mother. And she went through all of the nonsense and all of the pain and all the joys and rewards that all of you young mothers have gone through. And she was a pro at it. She did it 6 times. She did it successfully. 7 times. 7 times. One passed away. So she knew what she was doing. But for those of us in our generation, Evan, Melvin, Shirley, Jane, Carol, the rest of you, Ken, we knew her when she was a real grandmother. A real special kind of grandmother. The kind of grandmother that knows so many things that mothers haven't learned yet. And she was always looking out for grandkids. And she was always feeding them out the back door. Now, the food at our house was okay, understand. But at Grandma's house, it tasted better. And it was more nutritious. It had more vitamins in it, more minerals. It was healthier. Now, you're laughing, Carol. You think that's funny. I can give you an example. Ken, stand up a minute. Raise that right arm like this.
Oh yeah.
It's
It's a little bit thinned out now since I've been driving that pickup truck around.
Show us that muscle. You think he got that muscle from eating food at home? Not at all. He got that from hot bread and butter and jam that Grandma used to hand out to the back door to the starving kid all the time. And the cookie. And I can tell you another example. Now, Melvin, you stand up and show us your muscle. Oh, it's a whole lot bigger than I ever remember. We used to sing a song about him called
What you call
the Barrel.
used to be pretty good up here, but I had a case of dropsy.
But you see, I didn't eat as much as these guys did, so I didn't get the muscles, but I got curly hair instead. Grandma used to stay up at night making butter. It was a big jar about so big around, and it had a handle, and you had to turn it. And she'd stay up late at night after everybody else had gone to bed. And no TV, no radio, nothing, just turning this churn. And then like a miracle, suddenly butter. Have you ever seen that done? I mean, at one instant, it's cream, and then the next instant, it's butter. Only a grandmother knows how to do that. And then she would take this milk that Grandpa used to bring in after having milked the cow. What was the name of that cow? Stella or Mamie?
It was a Stella.
Stella? Yeah. I tried milking that cow a few times. I couldn't get the hang of it. Evan and Melvin, they learned to do it pretty good. But I never was able to quite do it. But she'd bring in this milk and put it in these shallow pans and take it outside and put it into a gimmick that Grandpa had built out underneath the tree there. It had wooden shelves, and it was covered all around with gunny sack material, and there was a tank of water up on top, and this water would dribble down through the gunny sack, and it would keep things cool during the hot summer. We called it the cooler. Yeah. And this milk would sit there in those pans, and it would separate. The cream would rise to the top. The kind of cows that you have today that produce homogenized milk haven't been invented yet. Stella was an old-fashioned cow. She made 2 kinds of milk. One was pure cream, and the other was skim milk. And Grandma would take this milk, this cream, and put it in a big pitcher, and then every morning she'd have this pitcher of cream and this big bowl of butter there on the table. And she made absolutely sure that every day, everybody in her family got a big dose of cholesterol. And look what it has done for the life of these people here. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it?
I have to tell you another story about Grandma, my mother, that I don't think many of you know about, but she always had a pen of chickens. She's talking about the cow and the milk and everything. But Grandmother always had a pen of chickens. And my father detested those chickens, except on Sunday dinner. That was fine. But the chickens were a headache to him. She raised these big Rhode Island red chickens, and her big red rooster always took the prize at the county fair with Mr. Clothier's. Mr. Clothier's big red rooster. Grandma's rooster always took the prize. Anyway, she was the first surrogate mother that I have ever known, because you know how it is when these old hens lay so many eggs, then they expect to have some babies. So mother would have 2 or 3 of these old red hens. They would get to the point where they wanted to sit on the eggs. So she'd set them with a great big pile of eggs, and then when they all hatched, she'd take all of the chicks away and give them to one hen, and break the other one up so she'd start laying again. So here would be one hen with all of the chicks off of these other 3 hens, going around the yard, stuffing them up under her wings, and so this is one of the things that mother always did with her chickens.
The chicken was good too, I remember. And the reason I'm asking to take this time is because I knew them perhaps better than anybody else in my generation. I went to live with them for a period of about 3 years after my father died. My mother had to move away to go to school. And I got to know the tune that I'm going to sing is commonly thought of as an Irish melody. It's not. It was written by some man who lived in Illinois about his wife, who was away at the time, and he missed her. And her name was Jenny. Now try to figure this one out.